for English, and we've got about 40 minutes or so to take you through, hopefully, something that will be helpful to you, a bit of a narrative, a bit of a story about our last few years, but also our attempt at a proper piece of research in the school. And we have an effect size to talk about things, which is very exciting, deeply exciting for us. But I want to go through where we are, tell a bit of narrative about the last few years. I've called this leading edge my arse, because you'll see why in a second. Because until the designation kind of was made up in the word leading edge school, but I'll tell you more about that in a second. I was at Huntington School in '98 as deputy. I was there till 2003 as deputy. I went to be a head teacher, came back, and it was my second headship, and came back to be head at Huntington School. And the first year that I arrived, the set of results that summer was 59% with English and Maths. My first set of results was 60%, and 2009 it went down to 57. And I can remember coming back thinking, on reflection, that I kind of got in, and the benefits of knowing the school had been outweighed by actually the problems of knowing the school. Because I knew the school already, I think there was a slight bit of complacency about my leadership at that point. So, in 2010, I was at that point in National Stretch's consultant head teacher for Yorkshire and Humberside. It was just men. I spent hours on the train to Reading. That's all I seemed to ever do, was go to meetings in Reading. And dreadful things to be. But I was introduced to the concept of raising achievement plans. So we had plan after plan after plan after plan. We had plans that fit. We had plans for English, and plans for Maths, and plans for modern languages. And I got people in Alex's department just making these unbelievably detailed plans. It was amazing. And we loved them. We loved these raps. We loved them. And I had that email. I had a visit from Ros, my leading edge consultant, and a bit later on, I think it was Dominic, I'll find out who it is in a second, he emailed me that email. And he'd heard about our raps, and I'd shown Ros our raps, and she loved them, and she wrote up in our report that year as a leading edge school. I was particularly impressed with our Key Stage 4 Maths English interventions to raise achievement. Their head is very good. And also got a new strategy. Leadership is very strong at this school, and fantastic. So he asked me, could he put us into our story, into this publication he got. And I just said to him in that July, just wait until we get the results. That was my email on the 29th of August. And that's verbatim, because what happened was that all after our results got worse. All the effort we put in, masses of effort, the results got worse. And I think the problem I think the problem was here. It was crap. We were exhausting people with all these interventions, and I think I sat there. If you've read my blog recently, I've written about this. I did sit there with those 55%, and because as a head you get the results on a Wednesday, not a Thursday. You get them a day early. I'm there on my own in my office, counting up, and can't be 55%. All that effort it was. And I sat there, and it was one of those cloudbursts like we had yesterday. I sat there, the rain was coming down. It was really kind of the most lonely moment in my career, and I wept and phoned my wife, and she said, "Come home, it's worth it." I mean, it wasn't really, for all the fun, it was a really dreadful moment. And you kind of reflect why we do all that stuff. And as a head, you've got to write in September the report for the government about the examination results. And you kind of want to be seen to have done everything you can. So you do as much as you possibly can. And that's why you're just covering your own arse. What you're doing, arse is a thing through it. What you're doing is making sure you've done as many things as you can. So if it goes wrong, at least you can say, look how hard we've worked. And it's just nonsense, because it wears people out. And actually, all that hard work you're doing, and all those things you're doing, are just they're completely self-defeating. And in November 2010, I wrote that as I think was the crux of all those schools that do all those interventions. Because it doesn't make, when you read that, when you really think about it, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Right? And I can see lots of nods around the room, lots of people who are thinking, I've just come off the back of doing all those interventions in March, April, May and June. And there was a comment, we knew we were on the wrong line, because in January we were doing some mentoring, and one student said to one of our mentors, we're really looking forward to all the extra revision sessions you're going to put on, and you making us go to them. When you start unpicking what's underneath that, that's the issue, I think, for loads of schools about all these interventions that we do. So, we thought really clearly, we'd already decided that we would reduce our development plan down to a very small number of development strands. When I was a head teacher first time 10 years ago, I was the king of massive school development plans. Those are really thick ones. And I've killed people with those in the past. And now we have really, really small, really thin ones. And 4 years ago, back in 2010, 3 years ago, we just worked for an outstanding teacher. We changed the structure of the school. We worked an interest in numeracy, a bit of Guy Clapson's Big 8 curriculum, and then just making sure that we had tutors interviewing students. Basic stuff. It's not hard, is it? To do decent things coherently. But the one thing we did do was change the structure of the school, so we have CPD every fortnight for 2 hours. So you come to our school, you have 61 hours of CPD every year. And I think you can't wish people to be better teachers. You've got to invest in CPD. So we also use our school a bit of business philosophy, a thing called Blue Ocean Strategy, based on the work really of Bill Bratton, who improved the police forces in Boston and New York and the effectiveness, and some principles from that. I won't go through those, but there are 4 key hurdles that you've got to get over if you're implementing change, and you go through a fair process. When I've spoken to Jonathan Sharples, and Jonathan Sharples in the room, he's talking later, we've talked a lot in the past about how it's not what you do, because I don't think school improvement's very hard. I think you do a few things very well. It's about implementation, and implementation is really, really the key to it. We spend a lot more time at our school thinking about how we implement rather than actually doing stuff. Doing stuff's quite easy. We spend a lot more time. So we did those 4 things there, and we thought really hard about how to implement them. And lo and behold, those have been the last 3 years of results. So from that rainy day in 2010, around it was about the 22nd or 23rd of August 2010 till now, the results have improved dramatically. 19 points better in 2010 and 14 points better and 15 points better than when I started in our headline figures. But it's about what I call, and what Alex Ferguson calls, having buttock clenching moments. It would be very, really easy back in 2010 to have done even more interventions. And we're actually by doing more and putting pressure on more people and going to find out people and rooting out people who are to blame for this. When actually, if you look inwardly, the only person to blame is the person who made people do all those raps, which was me, if you wanted someone to blame. So that's where we are now, and I think that's been a really good journey, and it's been a case of reflecting what we do now when we do interventions. We do as much as we possibly can to work out what worked and what didn't work, and we do qualitative conversations with students and with staff, and also a lot of data data. So if we mentor 15 students, we look at what their results are, and we decide whether that's had any impact. It's not scientific at all, but it's quite thoroughly done, and we present that to governors in September, and we decide what we're going to do the next year. And year on year, our interventions are getting smaller because we're just, in times of austerity, with limited resources, we're focusing our resources on what's going to have most impact, and the golden thread through to outcomes. So I don't get somebody to do this to write 15-page reports. They have a maximum of 4 sides analysis. And I want them to pick out 1 or 2 key things they need to do this year. It's going to make them better than they were last year. Really, really, really simple stuff. So that's kind of the story of where we are, and you know, I think it takes us through to where we are now. And the next 3 years is all about how we absolutely focus on becoming truly great. If you've read any of my blogs about that, it's about actually focusing on teaching. We only have 2 development strands now. Our development plan that's starting in these next 3 years just has 2. One about becoming great teachers, and that's focusing even more on putting teaching, improving the quality of teaching at the heart of the school. A really extensive coaching programme. We're using ARIAS. If you've read my blog, there's a bit more detail in my blog about it. And secondly, and I'll come back to this a bit later, for all the Dweck stuff there is, and I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck, I'm a big fan of Growth Mindset and her book. When I heard her speak the other day in Leeds, and the first question was, theory is great, we love the theory, how do you make it happen in a school? Even the Dweckmeister had an answer. She really couldn't answer that question, right? She put that through, that brilliant research she does again and again and again and again, and shows, you know, that kind of alligator jaw graph that she has in every time she puts a graph up. How you make that happen in schools, she can't tell us. So we're really working hard on that, and I'm going to come back to it a bit later. I've got 14 schools based around the Ebor Teaching School Alliance. I'm the chair of the research and development arm of the teaching school, and we've got about 14 schools in a growth mindset project, and I'm going to work, hopefully, pick Jonathan's brain about how we might come to assess the quality and the quality of that project. Using success criteria at the moment, when I think about development plans, I just think that's what I've come down to. I've come down to student voice and parent voice, quality lesson observations, Razor Line, C+, and a lap C+. I don't use anything else. You can have hundreds of different success criteria and measures. I keep it as simple as I possibly can. I don't know in any one development plan what has made the difference, what's nudged up those scores. You try and pare it down and keep things really, really simple. Now, just over a year ago, what's been transformative, I think, for me, has been blogging and Twitter. And I think everybody I've spoken to, and Amanda Spillman said it earlier in the talk that I just listened to, they said that it's been in access to CPD, access to research, blogging and Twitter has just been revolutionary. And certainly for me, my first blog I wrote on the 15th of June last year, in just over that year, the conversations I've had about education and about pedagogy have been second to none. I've met a huge amount of people. I've met Jonathan through this, I've met all sorts of people, Tom in the audience here, some great thinkers about education, and it's been transformative. It's got me thinking about my pedagogy and my practice much more than I've ever done before. And this is what Ben said back in March in that kind of talk that he gave, that Gove was at as well, to really set this research everything off. And that's what he said. And that's the challenge that we have, I think. And earlier this week, that's what Gove said too. Clearly, it's like profile, clearly, I'm not on that list. Maybe Tom Sherrington is. I met, if you haven't met Joe Kirby, he's a great man. He's speaking just down the road. I had a little chat with him today. I'm not chatting with Daisy, but I just make contact with all stellar people. Yeah, see if Steve, the next time he speaks, I'll get the name. But it really is important. And what we're doing today is really important, and I'm really interested in making a contribution. When I saw that picture of him, I thought he reminds me of someone, and I realised who it was. I've tried that, but I haven't got the hair. My hair's gone. I used to have, you see the picture, but this man who's in the corner, more seriously, is a man that matters to me, because I've had lots of conversations. Jonathan used to work, and still is contracted to work, I think, at the Institute of Effective Education at York University. And as I was I have quite a few contacts with the University of York, in one way or another. And I heard Jonathan talk at a heads meeting last year, and was talking about exactly what Ben Goldacre said, about this great research that exists out there, but we cannot get it into schools. And he talked to that, and I think I was possibly Jonathan, I was the only head who came up afterwards and started talking to him. This is really interesting. And we've done quite a bit of work since, and the conversations that we've had together have really got to the heart of this little research project that we're going to talk about now. Because Jonathan introduced me to the DIY evaluation guide. I'm sure people have seen that. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to go and see it. Because what it is a kind of a certain number of step guide to doing research in your schools and trying to evaluate policy decisions and strategies that you use in schools. Really, really good. And what we've done for the EEF, through the contact with Jonathan, is try it out and see if it works. Okay? So what I've got here, coming up, are graphs of the 12 stages, I think it is, and what it's been like for me and Alex to try and make a proper bit of research work in school. So this is kind of like the macro is the stuff I've just done about school development plans. The micro is how can you, in school, what are the challenges for people in school to actually undertake a piece of research and work out whether that change to pedagogy, that tiny change to pedagogy that you make really works, and try and evaluate its effectiveness on student outcomes. So, that's these are the first stages. Framing your evaluation question, deciding your measure, deciding your comparison group. We sat down for a long time one afternoon with Jonathan and Alex working through what we're doing. Alex is going to tell you all about that. And we had a question. And the question was this simple. That one. That's the question that we asked ourselves. And that's the question we were thinking about feedback. We'd already read the hatty stuff about effect size, and that feedback was important. We thought, we'd like to know if one-to-one oral feedback has an impact, a positive impact on writing outcomes. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to talk you through exactly how he did it. And please interrupt us, please ask us any questions.
Well, depends what you're going to say.
Interrupt Alex. No, I've got through my minute.
I think it's really important, if I think back to that meeting, I think that meeting in microcosms, a reflection today on what people are trying to do. I'm a subject leader, but I'm already a teacher as well. I see myself primarily as a teacher, but I'm a subject leader working for my department. I'm trying to shield them from the stuff that doesn't work, or shield them from the excess, and I'm trying to help them and make it work. And I think that meeting had the subject leader and teacher with the school leader and with the researcher, and there was those connections being made, trying to work something out that's useful, that I can take back to my department, and that is worthwhile. So one thing I remember, I went to the meeting, I was a little bit circumspect, because taking on something extra is always something that you're wary of. I think learning to say no is something you learn quite quickly. But Jonathan asked me a question. He said, are you interested in doing this? Is this question worthwhile? And it was. And that was the ultimate, whatever research questions we're looking at, it's got to be worthwhile, because I've got to sell it to my department and they've got to execute that, and we've got to see the value in it. So we kind of started to form this question, and I can't remember what the original was, but I think Jonathan very quickly started to pick holes in John and I's initial ideas, and just started talking about control trials and match trials. And I'm an English teacher, so I've seen that stuff vaguely in the background. I've kind of skimmed that to the good bits, to the answers at the end almost. But I needed to understand that, and part of good quality research as teachers need to be understanding some of the tricky bits so that it makes sense, and again, that's useful. So this question was trying to answer something that we were already working on. At the very start of the year in my English department, we looked at some of those John Hattie effect sizes, and I didn't know how to work out an effect size. No one in my department did.
Does anybody here, how many people here know how to work out effect size? Just interested. Sure. Mr. Hoskins might do.
I do, but I'm not going to stand up in public. It's very simple.
Yes.
Very simple.
I worked it out for a minute, I'll show you.
So we'd seen the numbers, but we just had a debate around those numbers without knowing, we knew, 0.4 was the benchmark and things beyond that worked. So, we started the year with that, but that was just a good discussion about pedagogy. And one of the things, having looked around at the research, is that feedback obviously works. And obviously I didn't go and get that from some book. Practice of 10 years of teaching, and everyone in the department came up that feedback is something you need to work on. So we found something that we all thought was valuable, and we decided on one-to-one feedback as being something we wanted more of. So we adapted our entire year structure. So we had one-to-one feedback weeks. And we tried that, and we worked out it worked, but it was pretty tricky with a tough class because you're dealing with one child and all the rest are doing stuff. And so we kind of saw the problems, and we were working through it through the year. And then near the end of the year, John came to this proposal, and he knew about the oral feedback. So we thought, well, let's measure it. Is it actually working? And one of the realities is, I had a bit of fear and trepidation because what if the thing that I've decided to lead isn't working? It's doing damage. So I was quite hesitant. I think that's part of the problem with educational research in schools, is that we don't want to be seen to be doing things that don't work. So we're a bit hesitant to measure them, and therefore we'll go for more kind of qualitative research because we can get the answers we want, and we shy away from some of the qualitative research. So I wanted for the first time to learn myself to go through it. So I was happy when we decided on the question. This is from last session. I don't know if that question fulfills all this criteria. Well-honed, specific issues, how to measure, and what types of evidence manageable. I think it is. It's something very precise, almost so precise it's kind of hard to feel whether it actually works. So one-to-one oral feedback between 5 and 10 minutes, teacher, student. Feedback on a piece of written work they've been working on. And we chose year 9 because we wanted to make it small and manageable. Now, perhaps in an ideal world, Ben Goldick would say about a large randomised controlled trial. We couldn't do that in the department. We needed something that was workable. So with Jonathan's kind of help and discussion, we went for a match trial. The thing is, even with a match trial of 2 like classes and co-planning, this is where it kind of gets really hard to, well, how can you isolate that variable? How can you actually prove that 1, 5, 10-minute conversation made the difference? And that was something as an English teacher I didn't know the answer to, and I wanted to experience it to see if I could find out. In that session again, this was led by Jonathan, and that researcher expertise is really important. We started to work out, well, how can we make it more accurate? Knowing that it will still have imperfection, but how can we match it as closely as possible? So we matched the groups, so they were Year 9R, 9Q. They were nominal top sets. So they were quite closely matched by ability. And then the numbers were exactly matched. And there was an absence at the end, a little tweak, but the numbers were matched. We decided on a structure, so they all did an interim writing task, which was our baseline. And then there was the control group who didn't have the oral feedback, But again, saying earlier about they didn't kind of get ignored, they didn't not get feedback, they got written feedback on that piece of written work. Whereas the treatment group got the oral feedback with the written work, so that the teacher could talk through the written feedback and explain some of the nuances of what they were writing. One of the problems, a bit like in the doctor handwriting, students often struggle. You can write great feedback points, but they don't quite understand it. So part of our one-to-one feedback idea was to have that little bit of extra explanation. This is where it started to take time and money, and this is where the teachers were quite anxious about it. These are two really competent teachers who were dealing with two groups of students they'd been working with all year, and they had to plan something different. And they were anxious about that, and it took kind of support and conversations to kind of work through those anxieties. And they co-planned it all, so that took extra time. It takes time off timetable, etc. So you have to find those kind of structural supports if you're going to do some quality research. And then moderated assessments. All of that written work had to be moderated between those two teachers to make it as accurate as possible. Now, levels nationally have been erased kind of overnight. We've created our own levels a couple of years ago, so we feel like we've got a good handle. There are imperfections between moderating and written work, particularly the subjectivity of some English work, but we tried to match it as closely as possible. So we were trying to be more scientific than we ever had been, and by having this small trial, I think we could do that. This is just one aspect of the planning. We had to plan specific lessons and weeks. I know one week there was a morning off timetable for something for one of the groups, so we had to reorganise slightly. So there are lots of tricky hurdles for really accurate, useful research, and we had to go through that. So this is part of the EEF plan that takes you through the steps that we went through with Jonathan. Conducting a pre-test. Effectively, it was a piece of review writing. Both groups had exactly the same lesson builder, exactly the same task delivery within reason, being with two different teachers in different rooms. And they completed that task. I'll talk about kind of what they were assessed for a little bit later. Then we delivered the intervention. So that work was assessed and it was fed back. The control group were fed back just the written work. The treatment group were fed back the written work with a supplementary oral one-to-one conversation. And then the post-test was, a couple of weeks later, was a second piece of review writing, a bit longer, a bit more extensive, with a bit more openness about choice of what they could do. But it was still a review, so we were trying to kind of have quite kind of narrow focus. I think at a lot of stages, there was this kind of fearful query, certainly on my part, and we joked about it with both teachers. Well, we want the treatment group to do a little bit better, because that proves what we want to come out. But I did not have a clue whether that would happen or not. And it was genuinely interesting to kind of wait for the response, because in reality, an oral conversation in the course of weeks of teaching is tiny. Our assessment measure. I will go through this quickly, but I think you need to know it and get the grasp. So we assess writing, which is 3 aspects. Writing 1, which is content, and it's basically purpose and style. Have the students match the purpose, genre, and style of that text type? Is it creative, is it humorous, etc. So that's quite a subtle area, but we work together as a department on that. So purpose and style. Writing 2 is structure, sentence structure, paragraph structure. And then writing 3 is SPAG, simplify it, spelling, punctuation and grammar. So those 3 areas were what we focused on, and there were definite answers about how one-to-one feedback has a different impact on those different areas. I went to the head of maths because I was a little bit insecure on the numbers, and said, well, we've got these students, most of them have target grades around this end, but we know on the shorter task they might be around this end. So we knew the lowest target grade was 1, so we just created a nice simple numerical system. These are our sub-levels, quite common in English, maths and science. we work with those. So we use these numbers just to simplify things a little bit. And then one example, I'll show you a few more examples. One specific example was William. And William was in the treatment group. And his target was higher, but he got a 3 in his writing one, writing to that person audience. He got 6 in his structure, sentence structure, paragraph structure, organisation, and he got 5 in his SPAG, in his spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Now typically, in English, what we find is that this writing 3 is where they're weaker, because they've not got that written accuracy. But this was quite interesting, because he struggled there. And then, post-intervention, he had that one-to-one conversation, and for various reasons kind of you can go into, but his writing 1 made a significant leap. And that was part of the pattern of the evidence we found. Now, there's a reason that we think, and we had this discussion as a department, and in particular as English teachers, is that when you have a one-to-one discussion, it's very hard to make any sort of difference to spelling, punctuation and grammar, which is something, a set of skills that's developed over years. And also, some students can make very obvious improvements to structure if they didn't paragraph their pre-test. You can make sure they paragraph it for their post-test. So we see some leaps in structure, but actually, one-to-one feedback, as it turns out from the evidence, really helps with style and purpose and audience, because the teacher can really talk through what they mean by that. They can have the piece of work and say, well, this sentence, the style of that, have you spoken to your, have you really matched your audience? So what we started to find are one-to-one feedback sessions work, but for something really specific. So it was really interesting to us, because we didn't know that beforehand, so the research was purposeful. This is part of the one group, and we created 2 documents, one for the control group, one for the treatment group. And this is the treatment group, and you see, this is the column, so this is the mini task they did here, this is the main task, and you see the improvements, and the general trend is over 1 sub-level of improvement for that person audience, 1 sub-level improvement for structure, and then less improvement for SPAG, for spelling, punctuation and grammar, which is kind of what we expected. So we started to look at the pattern in each group, so we talked about individuals. And as teachers, we had that analysis, and we tried to interpret it in a simple and effective way. And then we went about reporting the results, and that's where we had to go back to some numbers. And this is the summary. So for our control group, this was our evidence of sub-level improvement. So our control group, taught by a very good teacher, taught a scheme of learning that was very good, well planned, executed everything except that crucial conversation, and they made 1 sub-level improvement for person audience. They made nearly 1 sub-level improvement for the structure, and they made that lesser 0.38 improvement for SPAG. And then it got interesting to note the differences, because the obvious thing that leaps out, here, you've just got that 0.1 of an improvement, which can be negligible, and we kind of almost dismiss completely out of hand, but it's so small, as we could argue that it's not significant enough. Whereas the significant gain was this 1.3 sub-levels of improvement for person audience. So that 1 10-minute conversation really helps a student improve their style of writing. So it's something very precise about pedagogy that we could learn, about our practice, that we could show as improvement. So we noted the difference. The effect size, I kind of gave that stuff to John, because I wasn't commenting back. You can talk through the effect size.
Yeah, I mean, the detail of how to sort out the effect size is in the EF evaluation, and it's not very difficult. They write it beautifully and do it very simply. And what you can see there, what's nice, kind of agree. I think if that had been 0.37, that would have gone up to 5 months, kind of in advance of where they should compared to the other group. But you see, these 2, even what Alex says, almost dismissed as insignificant, there's a 2-month difference there. Although it's a low effect size, a 2-month difference there. on the SPAC, one might argue it's significant, one might argue it's not. But that was the detail, and this effect size thing is really interesting, and Jonathan's really interested in how that works. But we couldn't have done that with, and I'm going to talk a bit more about this, without Jonathan's help and without the EF evaluation. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. It was, when we've gone through all that, again, I was kind of giving support on the numerical analysis, and it kind of fitted, some assumptions, but it also made us think differently, because I didn't realise that the difference would be in that aspect of writing. And John and I were trying to talk about, well, what's the answer from it? And it was interesting because it showed us there was a difference, but it actually confirmed what we already thought, because we'd already made that change to have one-to-one feedback at the start of the year. So I sent an email, which was just a paragraph or so, wasn't it, about, and I termed it educated intuition. So at the start of the year, myself and others, we looked at research. I'd read Your Visible Learning for Teachers and other things, and kind of processed that with my 10 years of kind of teaching in the classroom, and I'd had that educated intuition. It's not a guess, it's more, because there's a lot of kind of thought that's gone behind that. So this idea of educated intuition, we kind of knew that that would be the answer. However, having that small piece of research, which was doable, we were able to prove that. So we could have the qualitative stuff, what teachers, what we think, and then the quantitative stuff. And that gives a powerful kind of dual argument. And Ben was talking about those different people and their response to research, etc. You've got to have that broad evidence base, because you've got to have some quality proof. And I think the next slide, what do we learn? Well, that our educated intuition was right, we made the change, and then secondly, that we will carry on. And then as teachers, we've already worked out how we're going to tweak one-to-one feedback, but we're going to keep that. So research had a really specific impact. And it wasn't your John Hattie, you're dealing with your external research, which some teachers in my department and beyond may doubt. It was research with our students, in our practice,
What made you decide to experiment with Tomsett?
It was, when we talked about it, we couldn't really get a randomised kind of scale, because it was the last term, so we couldn't have a scale of lots of classes. And we looked at a match trial, and then at Key Stage 3, we have mixed ability. Actually, we've now gone to all mixed ability. But at Key Stage 3, we have mixed ability. So we were trying to go for a match trial, and the only two stream groups we had were in Year 9, and it was a legacy of RE and various things. So we chose those for the match trial. It wasn't about ability, it was about the match, and also it worked out the teachers could do it for various reasons about kind of their workload, etc. So it was the right fit. It wasn't about ability.
Kind of some of those logistics that happen in schools, isn't it?
Yeah.
I noticed on your data when you showed every single child, I don't know if you can go back to that slide at all. Yeah. There's
the groups are bigger, and there's two groups.
Of course, so I'm not going to comment on sample size, but I noticed that Hope, for example, has made a lot more progress. And you've got Alan and Jack there who haven't. Is there anything, the kids, was there anything you could take away from that as well about the nature of the child and how they responded? I don't want to say learning styles, because that's not what I'm meaning necessarily, but how they responded to the oral feedback.
Well,
and did that guide you with the effectiveness of it for individuals as well?
What isn't on here, just for the kind of scaling it on, is we did have a box there, which was my discussion with teachers, which was a kind of that personal, individual evaluation. And what I had for quite a lot of this group, I call them Helen's group, really, they're kind of the Helen's group, is that quite a few of them were students who benefit from that extra support, that extra questions. And we noticed there was about 10 students who we thought that individually, that oral question was good because they didn't have the confidence to ask those questions. So we did think, on an individual basis, there were certain factors. Also, I think, on some of them, there were individuals where they'd done badly. So that, you know, in any kind of data set, it was kind of unique individuals. And we also had some students, mainly in the control group, there was a couple of students who just didn't paragraph the first section, and that was a very easy remedy, so they made a very big leap, and that slightly distorted things.